economic activity. There's two kinds of companies that you need to be looking at. One is your established cohort of companies, which was talked about to a fair degree in the presentations. But another grouping of companies is the startup companies. And I think it's interesting, if you look at where jobs are being created right across the world, both in the US and in Ireland. In the US, for example, between 1977 and 2005, there was only 1 year in which established companies created more jobs than they actually lost. And the second metric from that location was that almost all of the jobs that were created were in companies that were less than 5 years old. A similar analysis was done here in Ireland by Chris Horn and was published on his blog, where he looked at both IDA companies and Enterprise Ireland companies, and he looked over a 10-year period and found that in terms of the net change, there was little or no net change over that period. So what that is saying to me is that one of the big issues in terms of an innovative region is about the startup agenda. And everybody says, yes, we've got a startup agenda and we get startups and all of that. My contention would be is that we're not getting enough of them. And I think if you look at what goes on in the incubation facilities right throughout the BMW region, you will see a very innovative grouping of startup companies, not just in medtech, but in ICT and web services and so on. And you see an awful lot of graduates who are recent graduates beginning to start up companies. Evidence is one such example is Starlight Productions out in the Galway Technology Centre. It only has 6 people employed at the moment, but is doing very interesting work in the whole area of Facebook and other kinds of applications. So I think the startup agenda, in terms of creating jobs, particularly in the BMW region, is one that I think doesn't get enough of play, and I think I'd be interested to hear what the panel have to say on that question, please.
Okay. Does any of our panel want to take that?
Maybe I'll start off. Hi, I'm Nick. I think I would agree with you. I think it's a hugely important area, and in fact, if again, just to go back to metric for a second, one of the focus areas that we will have within that initiative is to assist entrepreneurs, inventors, people who are thinking of that they have a technology that has potential to be spun up, with market research, with design, and with prototyping, and getting their technology and bringing a clinical input to make sure that they're actually solving a problem that the clinical community need. I mean, one of the big challenges we have in terms of industries and starting up industries is to make sure that they're solving a problem that needs solving, or that somebody will pay for to have solved. So that is part of what we're about. I would agree totally about the need to focus on startups. I think one of the challenges, we have an innovation centre here which is full, and we have queues of companies looking to get in, 24 unit incubator. I think one of the maybe errors that we've made in the last few years is maybe too much, if I could say this, coming from the university sector without being shot, too much of a focus of startups emerging out of the university sector and out of technologies coming out of the universities, as opposed to spin-ins, people who have been out there in the big bad world and who get ideas from their industry experience, and that we should support more of those, and that's something we're very conscious of doing, as opposed to just focusing on technologies coming out of the university sector. We, for example, it's not part of this morning's discussion from my perspective, but I'll make a pitch for it while I have the chance. We've established what we're calling an NS Innovation Centre, which is essentially an outreach innovation centre that's jointly run between NUI Galway and the University of Limerick, where it's there to support entrepreneurs with ideas and with startup companies who don't want to come to Galway, don't want to go to Limerick, want to stay in their locality in Ennis and establish their company. And that's a sector that we're not generally supporting to a significant degree, because policy determines that if it's not based on a campus of an IoT or a university, then the supports aren't really there. So I think we need to look beyond the immediate campus locations, and we're looking at this as a pilot to establish outreach innovation activities beyond the immediate campuses of universities or IoTs. And there are lots of entrepreneurs out there, there are lots of people with ideas, and they're looking to spin things out, so I think we do need to support that.
Okay, just two very brief comments. One is that I agree with you fully in relation to the importance of the incubation centres, and I think Enterprise Ireland has to be commended for that support that they've given to the Institutes of Technology as well over the past number of years. I think the fact that most of them are at full capacity, I think Enterprise Ireland should consider extensions in a number of cases. I know in particular they feel that they could accommodate far more startups if they have the extra capacity, and plans were drawn up in that regard. In relation to the latter point that Terry made, I know this question of spinnings, and you mentioned that as well, and we've been part of a bid for some interim funding to pilot a number of new initiatives along with Liam and the network of the higher education institutions here. And one of the initiatives that we would hope to get funding for is for a spin-in initiative to attract people out of industry into the incubation centres. And if that's approved, we very much look forward maybe even to working with Enterprise Ireland and so on, and making sure that becomes a reality.
Okay, thanks for those responses. Gentleman here.
Hello, my name is James O'Doherty from the National Learning Network. My comment is really from a Mayo focus. In Castlebar and Westport, we have two medtech companies there for a very long time, Baxter and Ireland, medtech and pharma. One of the things that we debate is our failure to generate spin-ins, as you call it. I like that concept. We have an enterprise centre just being completed right now in Westport. We have an innovation centre in Castlebar, and none of them have really been successful in attracting people out of Baxter and Allegan and Hollister, maybe to another extent, in Ballina, who have years of experience, great knowledge, but they haven't brought it into the local spin-outs or spin-ins. I'm just interested, how could we stimulate that? And the comment about the support for Ennis is the ways that we could draw on that in the Mayo region as well.
Thank you. Maybe I think
Seamus Grimes from the Centre of Innovation and Structural Change here in Galway. I was very interested in how the two presentations related to each other. And the point I'm going to make, I hope it's not seen as too academic, because I think it's actually quite important. But if you remember the maps were produced by the BMW region. It was mentioned that there was only one city in the region. But interestingly, the map produced by Terry Smith had Derry on the map, in addition to other cities as well. The point I would like to make really is the issue of scale is absolutely fundamental. If we start adopting a provincial outlook, a provincial perspective on what's actually going on, within a very relatively small part of the country, I think we've got a problem. Innovation is, it's global in nature. This was very, very evident in precisely the maps that Terry Smith and the project that he described. It's about, it's about internationalizing expertise. It's about exploiting expertise from all parts of the world. It's about precisely connections with Georgia Tech and so on. But it's fundamentally about dominating markets more than anything else. So in other words, the real problem that was actually described quite well by Kieran, in fact, in his presentation, was the focus on the domestic market, the inability to internationalise. But this can actually be further made problematic by a provincial perspective, by a domestic market focus. So I think actually the project that was described in the second presentation is a very good example of where things have got to go, and what our understanding of innovation has got to be about.
Thank you. Veronica Corey from Sligo. counsellor and also working in the IT in Sligo. I'm going to raise a different issue altogether, is continuation and access of people into the future and the pool of intellectual value that we will have. What I'm finding now is that the change in the grant system for our students, we are losing a lot of good students, and this adjacent grant is actually losing us a lot of people that will be needed in the future if we're going to retain what we have and actually grow us into the future. I think it's something that needs to be mentioned because this is a very important point.
Okay, thanks for that, Veronica. So maybe the speakers have to respond to Mayo, James from Mayo, and Seamus in relation to the various maps about the scale of the provincial approach.
Well, maybe in relation to Mayo, firstly, I mean, obviously I don't know what, why there isn't maybe a sufficient level of spin-in activity. But I'd certainly, what I'd say is we'd be delighted to engage and partner and to ensure that, and we've very recently signed a strategic alliance with GMIT, which includes the areas of research and technology transfer innovation, and we'd be delighted to engage in a partnership approach to look at making again accessible the expertise, the infrastructures within the university as well as within GMIT, so that if industries or entrepreneurs feel that they want to tap into that, we'd certainly be delighted to make that available. I suppose from a previous experience we've had in Galway, where sometimes it's out of adversity comes new ideas and new companies, and digital is a classic example. Now we don't want, I think, more of that, but certainly that's been an experience in the past. But we're now finding that a lot of people coming out of places like Boston Scientific and Medtronic and other medical devices industries are, their knowledge of the industry and the needs are helping with finance. To then touch on Seamus's point in terms of the internationalisation and the global markets, I mean, essentially, I would agree absolutely. We have to think global. We have to be globally competitive, because industry, if they're looking for assistance or looking for support, then they need internationally caliber expertise, and we need to be thinking in terms of our industries, not of an Irish market, but of a global market, or certainly at least an international market. And I think we've been very successful in that. As a Western-based region, we have attracted global companies, and they are engaging with us. So I think we're doing some things right, but I would agree that we have to think of the global picture. And in fact, going back to metric, we're in fact also looking at, even across the island, we will utilise expertise wherever it is to support. So we're not about, this isn't a self-serving consortium, we will bring people to the right expertise wherever that is.
Okay, yes, again, on Seamus Bryan's comment, I suppose, about maybe a provincial perspective, I suppose just from the BMW Regional Assembly's point of view, that's our frame of reference, that's the geographic scale of where we operate. Obviously, we're not an island as a region, and we're totally accepted that the region is linked into internationally and nationally, and with Northern Ireland as well. It was noted in Councillor Burke's opening remarks, just the recent regional input-output model produced by the CSO, and it really did highlight the fact that a very, very high proportion of industry in the southern eastern region seems to be internationalised, whereas a much, much lower proportion of the industry, the BMW region, is relying far too much on domestic markets only. And there just seems to be that, and even just drawing, and you could say it's an arbitrary line down through the middle of the country that designates the two regions, but even across that line, there just seems to be quite a distinct difference, and certainly to us that implies that there is a huge potential there for businesses in this region to internationalise a lot more and to become much more outward-looking in their perspective. And then just on Councillor Colley's comments, I suppose, don't want to get into the politics of students' grants, but as a general point, I think people would accept that maximising access to higher education is of huge importance to the economy, but it's also of huge importance to people's own individual opportunities and life chances. So I think all government action in this area should be in support of maximising the number of people that can access higher education in whatever way that's found to do that. In terms of financing that, then that's a matter for government to try and find, but it's hugely important that we and actually the region does well in higher education access. We do very well. However, we don't retain a high proportion of our graduates in many respects. So our higher education participation is high. The higher education attainment of the resident population is not so high. So there's an issue there as well that we need to address.
Okay, thanks, Kieran. Unless there's one final question. Yes, Jim. And there's one man here. And then I cut it at that because we're running over time.
Thanks. Just a brief comment. Jim Ward, anyway, Galway. I'd just like to refer back to the point Jim Brown made in relation to the Irish Times editorial. I'm not sure what the motivation was behind the editorial, but my reading of that was that this must have been somebody who hasn't been in the West for a long time. And I'd just like to compliment the two people who made presentations this morning and gave us a positive view of what's going on here, which I think is very important. Because if one were to take the Irish Times editorial seriously, I suppose it wouldn't be a very attractive environment in terms of attracting people to set up industries or bring new industry in. It would seem to me that that was quite damaging, in fact. So the more we can do to publicise the positive aspects of what's going on here and all of the developments that are taking place through the BMW, through the university and so on. I know we try to do this, but when you see something like that, the motivation may have been to help us to get politicians engaged in supporting the West, but to take that as representative of what's going on here, I think was very, very damaging. I would consider it damaging anyway. And a foreign industrialist looking at that would say, well, that's not an area that looks very attractive from the point of view of setting up industry. That's really all I wanted to say on that.
Okay, thanks for that observation. One final comment just here, and then I'll leave it at that.
Things like this innovation task force, etc. Doesn't seem to emphasise it. You mentioned that in your talk, but so how are you getting on with your discussions with government and the minister for local government and stuff? Is there coming together on that, or are we just going to have different opinions and what's going to happen on that? Is there going to be a move to recognise regional policy in Ireland or not?
Okay, it's a difficult challenge, that.
Okay. I suppose to take the second one first. Yeah, I mean, we did. Well, first of all, in launching the report, the Minister acknowledged that this report presented very important perspectives that his department, and in particular the Office of Science and Technology within his department, perhaps needed to take on board. And subsequent to that, we have had a meeting with some senior officials in the Office of Science and Technology to discuss that. I think an important development, if you want to call it that, is this is more like the EU carrot and stick approach in respect of smart specialisation, in that if Ireland is to obtain ERDF funding from the 1st of January 2014, we have to present smart specialisation strategies, and I see that personally as an avenue which we are going to have to work with the Office of Science and Technology, with Prof, with Enterprise Ireland, with the higher education institutions, in identifying what the smart specialisation strategy for the BMW region should be. And I think that's going to happen over the next 18 months or so. So in a sense, there's an incentive there, maybe a stick, which is going to force us to think a little bit more regionally in order to avail of structural funds into the future. And then on Jim Ward's point, I suppose, on that editorial, my understanding is it was partly prompted by an important report issued recently by the Western Development Commission, particularly looking at the natural gas infrastructure, and the fact that under the current mechanism, a number of provincial towns with large numbers of consumers and so on wouldn't meet the national guidelines to qualify for a gas connection because the net present value is negative and so on. And for a relatively small public investment, there will be huge economic benefits for those companies and consumers in those towns, and that it was in that context that the Irish Times was saying that might be an investment worth making for the economic efficiency of industries in those towns.
Okay, look, I'm going to finish it at that because we want to try and get back on schedules. Could I thank our speakers this morning? for their very interesting and very different types of presentations, but clustered around one theme about regional innovation, knowledge-intensive services, one setting out the results of a detailed policy analysis, the second then giving a practical example. Can I also thank you for your questions, and